Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Logicbroker's From Chaos to Control webinar, where we're going to spend some time today digging into the challenges that retailers and distributors face when expanding their assortment. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about what breaks as operations try to scale, and we'll put together at the end a framework by which you can start thinking about how to expand and strategically scale your expanded assortment endeavors. I'm Steve Norris, Vice President of Digital Commerce at Logicbroker, and I'm really excited to have my colleague Blair Hall join. Blair, could you tell the group about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and hi, everyone. As Steve mentioned, I am Blair Hall. I'm the VP of Client Experience here at Logicbroker. I'm actually heading into my 13th year here, believe it or not, and have pretty much seen it all when it comes to chaos and getting it under control. I'm really very excited to share with you today what I have seen companies like yourselves do to get that chaos under control and really start scaling your business. So, Steve, let's get started.
13 years. Wow, that is
13
quite
years.
some time to be
I know.
helping retailers and distributors expand their assortment. I think, Blair, we both agree that there's just a lot of pressure right now in today's economy for retailers and distributors to really grow their vendor base and subsequently the number of SKUs that they want to be able to sell. But I think what was really interesting as I was doing some research is 62% of retailers actually find that vendor expansion is going to be critical to their revenue growth, right? That
Yeah.
could be things that we're seeing right amongst our retailers and out in the overall industry. Some of it could be pure play like SKU and assortment expansion, but actually a decent amount of it is backstopping inventory due to supply chain issues, and some of it's even people trying to reduce their exposure to high tariff regions. So a lot of interesting things happening right now. But what really piqued my interest and what was kind of the driver for this webinar is that the same report actually said that while it's important to 62% of retailers to expand their number of vendors, only 28% really felt like they had the capabilities, the technology, and the wherewithal to be able to continue to grow that vendor base without adding headcount. I thought that was a super interesting statistic. And Blair, knowing that
Yeah.
you've been here for 13 years and your team has really been focused on helping these retailers and distributors grow their vendor base. What are some of the things that you're seeing that are coming up, maybe more recently?
Yeah, well, see, I think this is what happens, right? When growth isn't matched by operational readiness. You have vendor onboarding that kind of slows down. You have product data becomes inconsistent, fulfillment misses the mark. And then what does that do? It just creates frustration with your internal teams. They feel strained, and with their customer experience, there's frustrations there. And it's not necessarily the strategy that's wrong, it's the structure isn't there to support what you want to do, right? So just to give you a little bit of an example, we had a multi-category retailer come to us, and they added about 20 new vendors in a single quarter, and you think, wow, that's a pretty good number for 20 in a quarter. But there was no standardized operating onboarding processes. Each of their vendors delivered product data in a different format that retailers had to support. And fulfillment rules weren't clearly defined, so vendors were kind of going rogue. And that led to delays, mismatched inventory, kind of led to cancellations and missed SLAs. And it really resulted in a poor customer experience, poor customer reviews. And then there was a dip in repeat people coming to the site and buying your products. So I think these are crucial things that we recommend processing out as you start to really grow and scale your business. And Steve, I'm interested to hear from you as as you are talking with people looking to operationalize, like and make this change to a more scalable platform. What are some of the common things that they're thinking about?
I think a lot of organizations are trying to, and Blair, I really appreciate and liked your commentary about structure, right? I think when we're talking with a lot of people on the front lines of trying to grow these programs that are coming to Logicbroker and trying to get an assessment and asking us maybe some questions about like, hey, why haven't I doubled the business? From a maybe a dropship perspective, for instance. I think that's a really nuanced question, but I think sometimes you dig into it and
Mhm.
the structure doesn't align for success. Maybe
Right.
buyers aren't incentivized appropriately. Maybe the vendor onboarding sits under supply chain and not a kind of revenue facing category. Those are the types of things we see from a structure perspective. And then I think,
Mhm.
like, from a technology perspective, a lot of the conversations revolve around how can I meet these vendors in the way, shape, or form that they can communicate with. Like we were recently talking to a category leading retailer, and their suppliers ranged from a guy in his garage making birdhouses all the way through to like the Marses of the world, right? So really
Mhm.
wide variety of technical capabilities and organizational sophistication
Yeah.
between the two. We won't talk about which one outsold the other one. You might find that kind of interesting, but that's some of the things that, some of the things at least that I'm seeing. I think the challenge that every business is facing right now is there actually is a significant amount of margin erosion happening in people's supply chain and commerce programs, right?
Mhm.
If we
Mhm.
even just took vendor onboarding out of it, and the time that's spent there, shipping costs are increasing, tariffs are increasing, cost to fulfill is increasing, right? All of these things are eroding margins
Mhm.
from from retailers and distributors. They're trying to find ways to be able to say, hey, how do I reduce some of these manual onboarding steps, but also how do I reduce some of the other things that are happening in this overall process, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's so many different touch points when you work with a vendor, when you order from a vendor, you try to understand a new vendor's catalog and assortment from the season. There's so many manual touch points there that people are just saying, okay, how can I leverage platform, AI, more sophisticated technology to be able to meet those, be able to maybe allow people to be a bit more efficient in the way it is that they work. And I think Blair, you have some interesting insight from working with our customers in other kind of interesting areas where they're seeing labor efficiency. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think data integrity is huge, right? I think when you have bad data, that automatically creates chaos for your team. And that's when you see a lot of touch points and the manual work that needs to be done just because you need to get better data. And just to give you a customer example, we work with HD Supply, and they were getting incorrect data from their vendors a ton. It was impacting everything upstream. For example, not having visibility into when shipments were arriving or incorrect invoicing that accounting had to then go back and handle manually. Then when they came over to start working with Logicbroker, it really gave them an opportunity to put checks and balances in place that forced the vendors to comply and send better data. They got to put in rules and validation around we need expected shipment date or different things within the invoicing or a tracking number, et cetera. And all of that allowed for them to see now a 90% in shipment accuracy, which is huge, right? And it's things like that that you may not even think about that can change the amount of manual work that your company has to do. Think about what's entailed when maybe you have to onboard 20 suppliers. Sure, that's easy, right? We can do that. We can manage that. But Steve, what if you had to now onboard 1,000 suppliers, right? And that's where scalability is crucial. And when we think about scalability, it's not just a buzzword. It can be measurable. It means onboarding vendors in days and not weeks, and having unified product content to make it easy as possible for those that are utilizing it. And another example that kind of comes to mind is our customer barbecue guys. They cut their vendor onboarding time in half. And in some cases, vendors, believe it or not, could go live in under an hour. You just think about that. Take a second and think about that. Under an hour, and how much time it saved for their team so that they could really focus on the relationships of the vendors and creating those partnerships, and going out and reaching out to new vendors and getting more to come on board and expanding their product assortment instead of chasing around spreadsheets or managing SLAs or things like that. And this is all because they had clearly defined processes in place and a platform that was easy to use and gave them visibility so they didn't have to scramble to kind of find it. Also, when you think about product, there's so many different nuances when it comes to it. Is it blue? Is it teal? Is it robin's egg? The descriptions, the images, the other variants that are so crucial in making the product look the most attractive on the site. You want to make that process as smooth as possible, not only for your vendors, but for your internal team who are doing this on a regular daily basis. And they're not scrambling to try to work with the 1,000 suppliers you're trying to get on board to piece things together so that they can get up the product in a timely manner. And I'm sure, Steve, you see the same with like inventory and pricing, right?
Yeah, I think I just learned that blue, teal, and robin's egg may or may not be the same color. I think probably depending on who I ask, they are all blue, or they're all very different.
Yes,
But yes,
agreed.
certainly when you think about inventory, like this is really kind of the linchpin of successful scale and a successful program, right? Like there is a big difference between 0 and 1 around inventory. If you have 1, you can sell it, but if you tried to sell 1 and you actually had 0, that's going to be an upset customer, right?
Yep.
And unfortunately, that may be a customer that's never coming back, right? So it's going to be really important. Like 10 years ago, sure, maybe it was fine that you got an inventory feed from a supplier once a day or every other day, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
being able to get that real-time inventory insight is going to be really important because brands and suppliers are selling across more channels than they ever have before, and that's continuing to grow. Even as some of these LLMs become more shoppable, there's more people competing for your inventory, right?
Yeah,
I think
that's a great point. Yep, absolutely.
the other kind of interesting thing here is like not having 0 in inventory, but having a supplier that yesterday received 100,000 of a product in just means if you don't have real-time visibility, you're losing sales because people are coming to your site to find these products and they don't find them there. They generally will go buy it somewhere else, depending on the relationship that you have with them. I think the other, when you move past real-time inventory visibility, there's this fulfillment complexity and fulfillment strategies and flexibility around it that I don't think people are talking about enough. And I think that's actually challenging, right? It's challenging to execute on this because you're starting to see organizations say, hey, I have these really fast moving products. Maybe they're vitamins, right, that are very popular online. If that's for a health and wellness retailer, you're probably looking at that product and saying, hey, that should probably be sitting somewhere in my store footprint. And that's generally going to be driven by wholesale replenishment. You're going to want the capabilities of being able to do that quick. The other thing that I think people kind of don't always acknowledge is I could probably walk into any warehouse here in Columbus, Ohio, walk to the back of it, not the part that's by the loading docks, and find at least a pallet of products that if I swiped my finger on it would kick up about 6 inches of dust. It probably doesn't make sense for that to be sitting there anymore. Maybe there's some demand for these products and your customers love them, but 100% makes sense that from a scaling perspective, to get that out of the warehouse into your tail of dropship suppliers so that you can still continue to sell it. You just don't have the inventory risk that's a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for reminding me I need to take my vitamins today. Bringing it up, appreciate it.
I think you're a little late.
A little bit. Yeah, but this is where I think, Steve, to your point, the right tech makes all the difference, right? When you think about self-service portals and the amount of manual work it reduces, it gives your vendors more control and gives both of you the visibility that you need to succeed. If you want to try to eliminate many touch points as possible. And if you think about when you're trying to onboard and you don't have the right tech, how many back and forth emails that you go through to say, I sent this email. Oh, I got it. I set up my password. What's next? If you had a platform that gave you and your vendors the ability to create your account, set up your connectivity, and do all the necessary testing to expedite the onboard times, you can, like we said before, you could cut that onboarding time in half, and it just makes it so much smoother and allows you to start selling faster. And then another thing from a product, you also want tech that's going to provide you with to keep your catalog clean. Think about how many times that you had to go over and rework and revamp the product descriptions or images before you can even get it out to the site. And you had to do it in your own system where it really didn't make too much sense. If you had a staging area almost where all the errors are captured downstream, so that you could do that and validate it before it even gets to your system, you could pass it right to your site. Boom, it's ready to go and your products are ready to sell. And it just eliminates days of back and forth. And Steve, it's crazy what technology can do to provide that kind of visibility for the retailers.
But I love what you said about the self-service part of things, right? Like, I feel like as everybody's trying to do more with less, people are busier than they've ever been before, right? They don't necessarily have the time to hop on a call or exchange 200 emails about a process, right?
100%. Yep.
But they do have time, like while they're, shoving down a sandwich for lunch, to go in a
Yeah.
portal and start completing some of the tasks that they need to complete. That's
Mhm.
starting to become, and I think we're seeing a lot more kind of self-service adoption around that. The other thing is you think about scale, right? And maybe this is a very obvious statement. If you have 5 suppliers, right, you're only doing a couple orders a week with them, you probably could manage their performance in a spreadsheet, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And you could probably get decently far with that. But eventually you're going to get to a point where you have to be able to have one unified single pane of glass around performance of these suppliers and performance of these products that are being sold, right? Or being received in some cases. So having that's going to allow you to scale much faster than you trying to figure out how to write a bunch more VLOOKUPs into an Excel spreadsheet, right? And I think sharing that with the suppliers and having somewhere for them to go so that you're reading from this single pane of glass
Mhm.
together becomes even more important. And then I think when organizations think about scale, it's not scale at any cost anymore. Like, we lived in a period of time where people were being rewarded for scaling regardless of what the cost is.
Mhm.
Now it is really about scaling profitably. And
Yeah.
sure, part of this profitability is reducing manual tasks, but part of it is making the right decisions in the first place,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
things around order routing and having rules around that to be able to say, hey, I want to send that order to maybe the supplier that's performed the best time and time again. Or
Mhm.
I want to send that order to the supplier that has the cheapest cost.
Mhm.
Or I want to send that order to a store, but if that store is out of inventory, I don't want to send it to the DC because they don't have it. I
Mhm.
want to send it over to maybe a dropship supplier or to a 3PL as a part of that process. Just going to be super important to think about scale as a way to be able to scale while either keeping or improving your margin base.
Right. Yeah, you want to reward the vendors who are doing what you're asking them of, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've lived in this world since 2020, right? That it has become just every day fairly unstable, right? Things are changing every day. There's been supply chain issues, there's new tariff policy. 2020, there was COVID, right? Like, we live in this world now that is inherently unstable, right? And
Mhm.
so flexibility is like
Yeah.
the one thing, like flexibility and agility are like the two things that retailers and distributors need to be able to think about because they need to pivot very quickly. And I
Mhm.
talked about this on a webinar before, but it always feels like it's really important to me in these times of instability. This is where you start to see people that are very prepared, brands,
Mhm.
retailers, distributors are very prepared and have had put thoughtful consideration in how they've constructed their supply chain, their supply chain actually come out on the winning side of things. Like you're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of organizations right now that like some that are in the news that are really struggling, that are large organizations that you would have said, hey, I'm probably too big to fail, right?
Mhm.
And then there's this other side of it that are like these new and emerging retailers that are really compelling story that are really thinking about things the right way around
Mhm.
leveraging dropship and wholesale replenishment together in a kind of a fully automated uh, go-to-market focus. Blair,
Mhm.
you work with quite a few Logicbroker customers that actually have deployed these techniques successfully. Would you mind sharing maybe one or two of those?
Yeah, and let's be honest, right? Like the most successful retailers today are the agile ones, right? They move SKUs between based on margin, demand, vendor capability, right? If you're not able to think outside the box and see what's best for the economy at this time, then you're already behind. And a good example of that comes to mind is our customer Babylist. They had been doing dropship with us for a few years. But back when retailers, you were all experiencing supply chain issues, they really started to focus on housing their own inventory and ordering in bulk so that they could fulfill orders and keep their customers happy without having to necessarily rely on the vendors having products in stock and maintaining their inventory and such, and just being agile in the type of economy is just so important because you never know when you're going to have to pivot. So like you said, Steve, you need to be ready to address it and accommodate it. And that and also in making sure that that doesn't sacrifice the customer experience, right? Because at the end of the day, they don't care where it's coming from, they just care that it's getting there. So that's why it's so important to be able to be agile and pivot where needed.
I think, Blair, you were creating some flashbacks for people that I had kind of forgot about around the boat that got stuck in the canal and the chip crisis and the
The
backup
strikes,
at
yeah,
ports.
all that.
There's all kinds of things that are happening, and I feel like it just, in some ways gets crazier by the day. But, as the organizations think about scaling, right? You think about these new vendor relationships that you're trying to build and maybe some new assortment that you're trying to unlock. It is so, so, so important to not sacrifice your customer's experience
Mhm.
during this process,
Mhm.
right? Like, I hate to say it, but I think Blair, you and I have both experienced this year where we bought a product from a fairly well-known retailer, and generally they deliver in maybe 2 to 3 days. Maybe 4 or 5 days to my parents in rural Pennsylvania. And you wait for the product to show up, it doesn't show up, it doesn't show up, it doesn't show up. And then like 2 weeks later, it finally shows up, right? That's not on brand for most of the retailers that we shop at. And,
Mhm.
unfortunately, when you add these vendors become part and an extension of your brand
Yeah,
and your teams, right? And it just gets
absolutely.
so challenging if there are problems downstream because like these customers, they're not like going and yelling at your suppliers when something's not
Yeah,
there.
cool.
Yeah, they're calling you, or maybe now they're blowing up the chat bot, or
Yeah.
they're putting something on X about your company, or they're giving you a poor product review. Like all these things like are real and happen, right? So I think it's really important to think about like not sacrificing the customer experience for the sake of scale. What have you seen also, Blair, like on your side from an experience perspective? A lot of Logic Brokers clients are really trying to optimize programs, make sure that their suppliers are delivering an at or better experience than they provide today. But maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the things you're seeing.
Yeah, I think enforcing SLAs is huge, right? You don't want vendors to be able to take their time. And when you think about some of these major retailers, the one thing we always get is we're going to get chargebacks if we don't get this delivered on time. Well, why can't that be the same for everyone, and everyone have that sense of urgency that they need to get these shipped out or there's going to be consequences to it, right? Standardizing returns and keeping a tight grip on just the quality and the performance across the board, doing checks around the packing slips and how it's packed and making sure that the customer has a great experience, even opening the box, right? So we want to, I see a lot of value and a lot of success when you as a retailer really take priority and care into what the vendors are shipping out on your behalf. And I think that that's the biggest way that you can get repeating customers coming back to you because they want that experience and they want to feel like you as the retailer care about what they're getting.
Yeah, I always think it's a fun game when you go to a retailer's website and the returns policy looks like one of those old choose your own adventure books, right? Where it's like,
Yes.
oh, if it is electronics and it is this product, this type of product, and it's from this manufacturer, then you do this. And if it is apparel and it is from one of these 18 brands, then you do this other thing, right? It's fun to read. It's not fun to experience. I think is the
Absolutely.
overall theme there. But what we love to do as a part of these webinars is give some people some actionable takeaway items as they think about the things that they're going to take back from this webinar and be able to action on. We always like to have a couple items somebody can use as a checklist to go back into the business and get to work, right? I think Blair, maybe you could talk a little bit about structure and automation.
Yeah, I think really, Steve, if there's one thing that you take away from this, it's scalability starts with that structure. You have to have the resources and the processes that you think you need in place. And don't be afraid to refine those and evolve those as needed, right? As you go along, get to see what works and what doesn't. And automate early. Don't get used to manually doing something because then it's harder to let go later. And the training of resources on a manual process is a lot more difficult and time consuming than on an automated process. So you don't want to get stuck in doing the manual work when you can just onboard it from the beginning. And I know, Steve, you've heard many of times, well, that's just how we've always done
Yeah.
it. But you want to be able to evolve and grow, especially in this economy where, like we said, you have to adapt very quickly.
I
So,
think,
yeah.
yeah, 100%. I think, sometimes we get caught up in this mindset, especially as retailers and distributors, we can get quickly caught up in this mindset of activity equals results, right? It's super
Mhm.
important to be able to make sure you're not conflating work with actual evidence-based results, right?
Yeah.
So making sure you can track performance of the program down to the nickel or dime and
Mhm.
down to the ship, the right ship date and ship times is super important. We talked a couple times about blending that fulfillment strategy to be flexible. If you haven't thought about that, it's worth considering what it would take
Mhm.
to, if you have an existing dropship program, how hard would it be to move somebody from that to a wholesale fulfillment model or back down? And then there's probably a tech assessment that organizations need to do as they dig into these first four bullet points. Hey, are you serving the technology that you have, or is the technology serving you? Right?
Mhm.
I think is really really important. I've seen across my career scenarios where, people are working for technology and not the other way around. So
Yeah,
I
no,
think,
absolutely. And then when you apply all of that, Steve, think about how much better you're setting your team up for success too, right? So it's not even just about the customer, but it's not burning your team out because they're filling out spreadsheets and then you get human error when you're putting the data in and they have to go back and redo it all over again. It's just with automation and the right platform, it just makes everything easier for everyone.
yeah, 100%. And if organizations are looking to scale without the stress, now that you've become scale experts from Blair and I, and you're looking to rapidly onboard new suppliers or find a centralized platform to be able to deal with product and order data across your supplier community, if you're looking to be able to support a dropship or marketplace or wholesale replenishment or hybrid model, and if you're looking for like real-time vendor insights, happy to talk. Right? Feel free to reach out. You can reach us at marketing@logicbroker.com. We're happy to do an assessment of your business. We have a couple fun ones already set up this week, and would love to talk to you in the future. Stay tuned for our next webinar. We hope to talk to you soon.
That was fun, Steve. Thanks so much for having me.